My name is Casey. My name is Casey King, and I'm the person who put this together. This is the 6th annual Addiction and Recovery Lecture Series. I do need to tell you a couple things. One in particular that's really important is there's 2 more nights to this series. It's not just tonight. So next week, next Thursday, the same time, food included. And then Thursday, March 7th. So you just keep coming on Thursday nights until I tell you. Okay? And also, how many Phi Theta Kappas are there here? You need to thank them. They helped with the food. Well, that's all I had to say. And I guess you're here to listen to see Ken Seeley. Ken is an interventionist, and I'll bring him on up. Ken Seeley.
Over again, I'm Ken Seeley, and I'm an alcoholic. And I didn't know what to talk about tonight about my story, because I really wanted to talk more about this 5-year plan. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my story so you understand where I come from. But I think every city should have this. I think, what you're doing here is just amazing, because that's been one of my goals, is to go to every city in this country and really open it up to the public to understand what addiction medicine really has to offer in today's age. We're always thinking back. How many of you remember that show 28 Days? Remember that movie? Years ago, Sandra Bullock, yeah. 28 days. Most people are still thinking 28 days is enough to cure this disease. To cure. That's another misconcept. That there is a cure out there for this disease. Like I said, I'm an alcoholic myself. I grew up in Middletown, New York, on the East Coast, Northeast. My dad was a fireman. My mom stayed at home until I think I was in junior high, and then she started driving a school bus. And I was just, a normal kid, no trauma. There was nothing that I didn't get molested. I didn't get beat by my parents. So I never really understood, when they talk about addiction and people that have the disease of addiction, there's some form of trauma that triggers, that makes them feel, would make me feel less than and want me to, have the addict. I'm switching my AA hat and my work hat. I'm trying to how do I balance this? But, so I'll just tell my story. So when I was young, I didn't understand, there was nothing that was wrong. Everything seemed right. We went to Puerto Rico once a year to visit my grandparents. We went to Florida to visit my other grandparents every opposite year. So I really had a great upbringing, going camping in the 70s, snowmobiling. So nothing was really, wrong. And so when I was in junior high, I never really had a lot of friends, though. I was really isolated. My sister had all the friends, and I didn't have any friends. I was just isolated and scared to death of my own shadow. If you would blow behind me, to think that I'm doing this today, if you were to blow behind me, I would jump, across the hall, petrified in fear that you saw me screw up on something, whatever. I don't even know what I was doing. But no self-esteem, nothing. I mean, it was just like I was really, really scared to death of my own shadow, I guess is the best way to put it. So I grew up, I think, this is why I think it's the disease concept in my brain. I was like 5, 6 years old. My sister was about 4 years old, and we had an old Corvair. And do you remember those, when those little Corvairs? Somebody's shaking his head. Somebody remembers. We had one of those old Corvairs, and my dad's driving us to the fire station to get his check. And so I'm fighting with my sister because I want to sit shotgun. I want to sit by the door, right? Remember how little kids do that? I want to sit by the door. I don't want to sit in the middle. So we're fighting okay, you sit by the door. You sit by the door. So I'm like, okay, great. I won. I won that battle. And so we're driving to the fire station to get his paycheck, and he makes a left-hand turn, and I'm on the side here. And when he hit the gas to take off, I pulled the lever, and I rolled out in the street. And the ambulance came. There was nothing wrong, but I was a little sissy. I was scared. I was crying. Oh my God, what's wrong with me? I'm dying, you know. And so they took me to the hospital. And my mind told me, he threw me out of the car because he likes my sister better than me. How dare him? He hates me. He threw me out. Meanwhile, I don't remember that I fought to sit on that side. I don't remember that. I'm fighting, you know, my mind is telling me he hates me. And when I was even younger, when I was 2, I don't even know how I remember this, but when I was 2, I remember, oh God, they're bringing another baby home. I was like, oh, hello, I'm supposed to be the only one here. So with that and growing up and, you know, just these kind of weird things that happened in my upbringing, tell me that, you know, give me examples of why I'm an addict. You know, the brain disease concept, these are the kind of thinking patterns that I see with people I work with, that they also are similar, you know, the low self-esteem. So I'm in school, and we were going to Florida one year, and we're going down to Florida, and we're taking home videos. We're like watching those little videos in the older days, and they had those back in the 70s, those little things that made those little noises with the, some people remember. You young kids don't get it. Young kids are like, what? But there was these old-fashioned videos that they would have, like they would go around, and you do the home videos on those. And I was back watching it when my dad changed it from them to VCR. And I'm watching it, and I see this little kid running over like rocks, jumping over rocks. And I said to my mother, I said, oh my God, who's that little kid? And she goes, which one? Because there was a bunch of us all hanging out as they're filming it. And she goes, which one? I said, that one. Who's that little kid? And she was like, that's you. And I was like, me? I was like, oh my God, I should have had a little skirt on. I looked like a big sissy jumping around little rocks, scared to death. And so I think, I don't know, but I think maybe that's why the kids used to pick on me when I was in school. And I used to get bullied all the time. I used to get beat up. That's why I was afraid of my own shadow. And if you asked me what I wanted, I would be like, what are you having? You know, what are you having? What are you getting? Because I always wanted what you had, because I didn't know what I wanted. I had no idea what I wanted. And so when I was, you know, getting through, you know, puberty and starting to come about when I think I was like 15 years old, and I was on my way to school, and my neighbor said, tomorrow I'm going to bring some pot. You want to smoke some pot? And I was like, what is pot? I was like, I don't know what pot is. I was like, but sure, he wanted to do something with me. Nobody wanted to do anything with me. I was like, I'll smoke some pot. Oh, what else you want me to do? And so that day, I didn't go to school the following day because I was petrified in fear. I was like, what did I just say yes to? I'm going to smoke what? And so I go to school, and the following day, and how come you weren't here? He's making fun of me. And I was like, oh, no, bring it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. So that was that was kicking off my using. And so I smoked pot with him. I didn't get high the first couple times. It took me a while to get high. But once I got high, and once I had my first drink, it was that feeling that all addicts talk about, that you finally feel comfortable in my own skin. I was like, oh, thank God, I don't feel judged. I don't feel like everybody's going to throw rocks at me when I walk down the hall. I feel like, you know, I'm part of society. I'm part of the school. And so then what I did is as I got older, back then, it was in 1970 something, early 70s. And I was born in 1962. So when I was 16 in New York, you could go to bars at 18. So I changed this 2 to a 0 on my license in New York, because then it was just a piece of paper license. You just take an eraser. Somebody else knows. Oh, it was so easy back then. You take an eraser and you take a pencil and you take the 2 into a 0. So at 16, I was able to go to bars. And I had my ID, and I would drink, and I would come home, and I, drive home drunk, and I would take acid and mescaline, and I did all kinds of drugs in high school. Once that was ignited, that's why, marijuana being legalized, somebody asked me that today, how do I feel about it? But marijuana was the gateway drug. That kick-started my disease where I didn't have an off switch. I had no off switch. You put anything. You show up and you say you got acid, you got mescaline. I don't care what you got. I remember one time, I was really desperate, and I was like, I knew my grandmother. She lived with us at the time, and she was older and she was getting sick, so I knew she had a lot of medication, and I was like, well, I'm just going to go take a little bit out of each one. And I went in the medicine cabinet and poured like 5 or 6 pills in my hand, put them in my pocket. Anything I could get my hands on, I would take it. And so I went to school, and I took a mouthful of pills of what she had, and I was sitting in class, and I was like, dozing off but awake, and every 5 seconds I had to go to the bathroom, and I was like, what the hell's wrong with me? And the teacher's like, you can't go to the bathroom, you just went to the bathroom. And I didn't realize I took her water pills. So, I mean, that's the kind of addict I am. One is not enough, and I think that's what you hear a lot of addicts talking about. So my mom and my parents started getting a little judgmental. They didn't really like this. And I was like, they're on my back too much. I can't take this crap. And we were fighting all the time. All the time we were fighting. And so I said, I know how I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to join the Air Force. I'm a man now. I'm 17 years old, and I'm going to graduate from high school. I graduated in June, and then in October I turned 18. So my mother's like, I graduated at 17, and my mother's like, and I said, I'm going into the Air Force. She goes, you can't go in the Air Force. I have to sign you up. You're only 17. And I said, I already signed up, and I'm going in 3 days after my 18th birthday. Screw you, I'll show you. And so, because she was just getting on my back all the time about, what is the matter with you? She used to say, oh, you have mono. You have mono. There's something wrong with you. You have mono. And I was like, oh my God, I don't have mono. I like marijuana and acid. So then I go after that. I go to the Air Force. I go in the Air Force, and I go to Texas, and then they station me in Rimini, Italy, and I'm in Italy, and I'm with all these Italians, and I was on an Italian base, and there was only a few Americans, and I don't know if you know, but the Italians love hashish, right? They love it over there. So I'm over there saying, well, this sounds like a lot of fun. They have hashish, and I was like, so I would write to my sister and say, because you couldn't really make phone calls like you could today. We had to go to this telephone company and sit in this long line. And so my sister, I would write to her and say, send me some acid and mescaline in the mail. So this is recorded. Uh-oh. What you doing? Well, I guess that's a long time ago. So she sent me acid and mescaline in the mail, and so the word got out that my apartment was the party apartment, and we were all getting high and drinking. I mean, around my living room, it was all liquor bottles, empty liquor bottles around the living room, and just party, and till one night, thank God, we had no drugs left, and the apartment got raided, and by the police department from Rimini, Italy, and they came in and they took us all in and said, where are the drugs? We know there's drugs here. We've been hearing that you're all on drugs, but we ran out that night. All we had was liquor, and so at that time, I got an attorney, and they told me, if you tell the truth, you'll get out of this a lot easier. So I said, okay, I do acid, and I smoke hashish, and I do everything else. And they said, good, you're not staying in the Air Force. You're getting out. So they kicked me out. And again, they made me go to an AA meeting in Italy, and then they sent me to Germany, and then I got blacked out in Germany and on my way home, and made it back to New York, and I had to put my tail between my legs and beg my parent, not beg, but they would have taken me back. They take me back today, you know. But I had asked my parents to go back and live with them, and so I did that for a while. Moved for a few months. Moved to New York City. New York City, they were an hour away. I moved in with my aunt in the Bronx. Lived with her for a while. Got my own place in Manhattan. Found cocaine there, so then cocaine became my drug of choice and not alcohol anymore, and AA wasn't for me, that was for old people, like I am now. And no 19-year-old belongs in AA. I'm not even legal, or I was legal to drink, but barely legal to drink. And I'm just starting my drinking, pattern, so I go to AA, didn't work. I go to New York City for 3 years. I mean, back then is when Studio 54 was big. It was going to those, blacking out, waking up in dumpsters. None of that is an addict. This is just having fun with, no career, no ambition in life, working as a waiter and barely being able to make it to my job. Then I got bored with New York City because, well, I didn't really get bored. It was my parents, because they were only an hour away, and they wanted me to come home for Easter and Mother's Day and Christmas and this and that, and it was just too much. I was like, oh my God, every holiday you want me to come home. I'm moving to California. It's harder to come home for California. So I moved to California. I worked at a Sizzler there, waitering, then managing. Then I worked at a treatment center. The owner of the Sizzler was in recovery, and my sister was pregnant. She lived in California, so she's pregnant, and so I'm living in California with them, and she has a baby. So they were like, "Oh, you got to find your own place." So I said, "Great." I moved in with the owner of Sizzler that was helping me find a place, because he knew I needed to be in recovery, and I think he had like 6 years at the time. So he goes, "As long as you stay sober, you could stay with me." I was like, "Oh, great, I love that idea. I love sobriety. This is great. This is so much fun." And so he bought into that for a while. Me and his daughter were doing cocaine in the bedroom and hanging out, doing lines, and she smashed his new Mercedes, and, I'm sober, telling him I'm sober. So I'm living there. For some reason, he found a vial of cocaine in on me, or on my jacket. And so he says, or in my jacket, when he threw on one of my jackets, and he goes, "What's this?" And I said, "Oh, that's when I lived in New York. I don't do that anymore." How many addicts have heard that one? It's my friends. Or it's my friends, or back when I used to get high. So I used that one. He goes, "Yeah, that one isn't going to work. I think you need to find your own place." So I found my own place, and I ended up working for him, and he opened up a treatment center in California. And I did the medical billing there. I would, back then in the late 80s, insurance was paying a lot for treatment. And so I did a lot of the medical billing at this treatment center. And while I was there, while I was at the treatment center, the rest of the staff was like, it's either him or us. They all ganged up on me. I was like, what are they talking about? I was like, innocent me, I don't do anything wrong. And meanwhile, I was like, Dr. Heckle, Mr. Hyde, when he would show up, I was friendly, happy, smiling. And the minute he'd leave, I'd be like, F all of you, I don't care what anything you say, he's my friend. And so they were like, we're tired of this roller coaster. Hello, they're dealing with a full-blown addict, crystal meth addict. And so they fired me. And the day that they fired me, my supervisor, the executive director of the treatment program, he was teaching interventions. I mean, it's so weird how God plays these things out in your life. He's teaching interventions at a local community college, and he's the executive director of this treatment facility. So they do the intervention on me, but my boss chickened out. He'd even wait for me to show up the next day. He calls me up the night before and said, they're going to do an intervention on you tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, that's not really good. Now that I know what I know today, you know, you don't really call and tell them. I was like, so he was a little enabler, I guess. And he said, you know, they're going to do an intervention on you tomorrow. And I said, oh, well, there's nothing really wrong with me. And I went to treatment the next day. Well, I didn't really, you know, I called him up later on, and I said, well, I might have a little problem with crystal meth, doing it every day for 4 years. A little problem, just a little. Every day for 4 years, I'm doing crystal meth. And so he says, well, you know, I'm telling him little, and I know it's like this. And he says, well, what about treatment? Do you want to go to treatment? And I said, no, I don't think I really need treatment. You know, I think I'll be fine. And then I thought, this is how I know. This is the way an addict's mind works. I thought, if I go to treatment, because I was doing insurance billing, remember, at his treatment facility, and I wasn't going to go to his treatment facility because I would hear in the group therapy, they used to have like those waffle bats, and they would hit chairs, and my office was right next to it. I was like, I'm not going in that crazy room. Are you crazy? Are you kidding me? So when he asked if I wanted to go through his, I said, absolutely not. But I had insurance, and I went through another one, and he said to me, he goes, well, do you want to get, you know, do you want to stay, or do you want to go to ours or not? I said, no, I want to go to a different one. And I knew that disability paid more money than unemployment. So if I went to treatment, again, manipulating the system to get more money to pay my bills while I'm in there, I could learn how to really handle this and learn how to sell drugs, because I was selling crystal meth at the time. So I could learn how to sell meth better, and then I never have to work a job ever again in my life. I said, that sounds like the best plan ever. I'm going to do that. I'm going to learn how to slow down, and I'm going to learn how to sell meth, and I'll never have to work again. Screw everyone. I'm just going to learn how to be a good dealer. Meanwhile, my friend that I was a dealer with, he was like, I'm never going to get anything with you again. He goes, you always do everything. There's never anything left. I wasn't a very good businessman, I guess, is the way he looked at it. So I go through treatment without even wanting it. And I think this is the most important part. I didn't want to get sober. I wasn't ready to get sober. I thought all the people in recovery were losers. You know, they just didn't know how to have fun. And, you know, I just was not, and I did not want what everybody else had in those rooms. And again, I went to manipulate the system. I stayed in that treatment facility for 45 days. I started feeling a little bit better and understood that I had a disease that was killing me. And when my doctor told me that, you know, because back then in 1989, there was a lot of people dying of HIV and AIDS back then. I mean, everywhere people were dropping dead of AIDS. So I was 130 pounds. I'm like 210 now. So I was a skeleton. And I thought I was dying of AIDS. I was like, oh, I must have, you know, got AIDS because there's something, you know, I'm dying here. There's something ain't right. And hello, it was crystal meth addiction. So they took my blood, and they comes back, and the doctor says, you know, you don't have HIV. He goes, but you have another disease that's going to kill you faster than HIV. And you'd be lucky if you had HIV right now. He goes, because your disease, you're at the end of your disease right now. And I was like, oh my God, they finally found it. It's this like rare cancer. Like, you know, I don't know what it is because I'm special, right? Something rare, probably nobody else ever had before. This doctor's going to tell me what it is. And I'm at the edge of my seat. What is it? What is it? Tell me, please. And he goes, you're a drug addict. I was like, that's a disease? What is he, crazy? And so that was the beginning stages to really understand and really looking at all the behaviors of, you know, getting thrown out of the Air Force, you know, DUIs, all this other stuff that I kept blaming on other things. And that's really, you know, what got me to surrender to my recovery process. And once I heard that, I heard the disease concept, I was like a duck in water. Then all of a sudden, they called me AA squared. I was going to a meeting, 2 meetings a day. I felt bad because then I got another job doing medical billing for a doctor in Beverly Hills. And I was working for this doctor, but I really wasn't working. I was on the phone all day talking to my sponsor. Is this recorded? It's going to come after me. I was on my phone talking to my sponsor, you know, crying on the phone all day long, you know. So I really wasn't working most of that first year of my sobriety. It was really about, you know, the solid foundation that I built in my recovery. And, you know, recovery, the miracles of recovery, oh my God, I can't even tell you. You know, all of us, everyone in here has dreams. And we all have dreams. We're born with that gift of having dreams. And by working the steps of the 12-step program, is anybody familiar with 12-step programs? Yeah, a lot of you, is great. So by working those 12-step program, that 12-step program, well, I could say programs, I didn't get to that point yet. But by working the steps of the 12 steps of recovery, those dreams have surpassed, the reality has surpassed what the dreams were, you know, and it doesn't make sense. I can't put a finger on how it really works, but, you know, little examples are, you know, I was living in an apartment paying $800 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment in LA. And it was I love this apartment. It was a little Spanish style apartment. And I had like, I would say 8-9 years sober. And I was like, God, I would love to live in a 2-story house, you know, like I grew up in, upstate New York. It would be so nice. And that was just a dream in my head. And that was nowhere connected to a reality because, hello, I couldn't even pay my $800 rent. Hello, what am I going to buy, a house? I can't even pay my rent. What am I thinking? That's like a so far-fetched, you know, dream that I'll never, ever able to obtain, ever, in my entire life. And so I had this, I couldn't pay my rent. I had to get a roommate to pay my rent at one time. And, you know, still working the steps of recovery, working the program of recovery, I was able to, you know, at that time, realize that the reason why I wasn't able to rub 2 nickels together wasn't because I wasn't clean and sober, but I was in my full-blown addiction for sex, love, and codependency. And so when I was 9 years sober, I bought a gun on the internet. And I was planning, I said to God, I prayed to God, I'm really, you know, spiritual. I love, you know, prayers. I love, you know, meditating. And I said to God, I said, you know what, God, if you don't put something in front of me before that gun comes in the mail, I said, I'm going to just end it and shoot myself. I can't live in the pain anymore. The pain was so intense. It was so intense. And I was like, I don't get it. I have all these years clean and sober. I'm sponsoring all these guys. I go to a lot of meetings. Why am I in so much pain? So I'm online looking for sex, and I meet this person that tells me he's a psychologist and he has 3 PhDs. And I tell him, oh, you know, it's interesting because I just bought a gun and I'm going to kill myself. And he's like, what? He's like, get in my office tomorrow. And I was like, oh, I don't have any money. I can't afford it. Doctor, I don't know what to do. He goes, get in my office. We won't worry about that. So I went in and he treated me for 3 years for sex addiction, for love addiction, for codependency, and I started going to those programs and working those steps in those programs. So it's kind of like that whack-a-ball. Is that what it's called? Whack-a-ball? Whack-a-mole? Whack-a-mole. You know, I got my drugs and my alcohol, okay. Then love addiction comes up, then sex addiction comes up, and then, what was the latest one? 3 years ago, eating disorder. Oh my God, eating disorder was huge. You know, 3 years ago, I was just telling him when we were eating in the cafeteria, for my mom's 70th birthday, I said, oh, I'm just going to have one piece of cake because I was thin and I was looking good. I'm going to have one piece of cake. And that one piece of cake was one of 5 different cakes that she had. And 3 months later, I was 50 pounds heavier because I didn't know how to stop. I don't have that off button. I just kept eating and eating and pizza and everything I could think of, sugar and pizza, and give me more and more and more. And so then I started going to OA meetings and working that 12 steps. So hello, here's another one. I don't even know what's next. I don't even want to ask. Because I heard somebody say yesterday there's 8 of them. I was like, 8? I think I'm only through 6. There's 2 more? It's horrible. But what I wanted to do for the next half hour is really talk about, what it's been like since I got into what it's been like since I got into the business of intervention. To go back to that 2-story house, we just sold that. We owned the house for 8 years, and we just sold that house, the 2-story house in LA. LA doesn't have 2-story houses; they're all single level. And we had a Spanish-style 2-story house for 8 years. We just sold it and moved to Palm Springs, and now we have 2 sober livings. So those dreams that are planted in your brain can become a reality, in my experience, as long as you're doing everything right internally. If you're working a good program, you're doing what's right for mankind. That was another thing. I had work addiction. And a colleague of ours, John Southworth, he always says, no, it wasn't work addiction, it was money addiction. You're lazy. I was like, wow, that's not very nice. But I always thought, if I had $1 million in the bank, has anybody ever thought this? If I have $1 million in the bank, I won't have to worry about that, and I'll be okay. I'll be okay in here. If I only had $1 million in the bank, God, give me the $1 million in the bank. And God never gave me that $1 million in the bank. And I was like, it's just like looking for the outside to fulfill the inside. That emptiness that's internal, and that's really what I believe for me is the disease. Sex, love, a relationship, money, drugs is going to fulfill that emptiness that's in here and make me feel a little bit better in order to go out there. But if I use the 12 steps with admitting that I'm powerless over that and my life is unmanageable, that's the first step. As long as I'm able to do that and then continue to work the steps, those dreams that are planted in my brain turn into a reality times 10. A million times. The dreams, you will not even be, you will be shocked at your dreams as they each come true, one after another after another. And it's so simple. I'm the only one that complicated that. And so when I had, God, how many years was it? I think I had 10 years clean, and I went back to work for that guy that owned that treatment center, and I didn't like the work addiction anymore. I didn't like working to make money. I felt like a gerbil, run, chasing the dollar, and where was I going? Nowhere, just falling off, exhausted, never ending up anywhere. And so I said, you know what? I said, I will be happy, God, living the rest of my life in this 2-bedroom apartment in Hollywood, in LA, and working for $10 an hour and helping people. That fulfilled that void in here, helping people. And so I gave up on making a lot of money. I gave up on being successful. And I just said, I'm going to work at a treatment center and work at them and just learn how to help people that are suffering out there with this addiction. And I saw with 10 years clean that my life has changed drastically now that I'm in recovery for my love addiction and all the other addictions. I said I could really help people, get into recovery and have a better life. And that was like rocket fuel for me. It was the most amazing experience to not have to go to work to make money. To go to work and really just care about helping that suffering addict out of their misery and helping them into recovery. And so as I was answering phones there, you know, I'm 23 years sober, so it was like 13 years ago, you know, 12, 13 years ago, and I'm answering phones there, family members were calling saying, well, what about my spouse? What do I do about my, you know, wife? What do I do about my kid? What do I do about this one? And I was like, tell them to call me. You know, I didn't know what to tell. Hello, tell them to call me. I don't know what to tell you. You're not going to, you know, they're not going to come in. And then I realized that there was this business, and there's this field out there called interventions. And my first intervention was horrible. I took two guys from the sober living that I was at, and I said, and they were Persian. It was a Persian family, and they didn't really understand much English, and they were living in this big mansion that their son provided for them because he was selling drugs. And they had this beautiful big screen TV and all these gifts the son was buying them because he's selling drugs. And doing really, really well. And so I knock on his door, and he's locked in his bedroom, and I knock on his door, and we're talking, and he goes, I got a gun in here. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do about that? I wasn't even trained to do interventions. It was more of a 12-step call. And he goes, I got a gun in here. And all of a sudden, he runs out the back window and runs into the garage, and he has his BMW convertible, and I run in the garage, and I'm trying to talk to him, and he's hitting the remote control to open the garage door opener, and he couldn't open it, and he's, you know, totally under the influence of crystal meth, so in crystal meth psychosis. So he hits it on reverse with the door shut, slams through the door. All of a sudden, the garage door is on top of his convertible BMW, and the police and the helicopters are all around town chasing him down because the neighbors called the police. So that one didn't really end very well. That was really not a good experience. And, but it made me realize that I think I better get some training before I keep doing this. So I ended up going to the community college and taking courses on interventions at that time, learning more about the industry. Ed Storty, who's a colleague of mine, he was able to, you know, teach me and help me with how he did his interventions. I was like a sponge in water, just sucking it all up. Teach me, show me how to do, you know, how to help these people. And I'd go out there and I slowly learned how to do them. And then all of a sudden for that treatment center, I was doing 4 a week. And I would fly to the East Coast from the West Coast and then fly the patient back there. I would take the red eye, and I was like just so burnt out. I was just working so hard, going back and forth and back and forth. And all of my people I was getting them in. I had like a 92% success rate. You know, I had a really good success rate in getting the person into treatment. But this is why I want to talk about this tonight before I go to questions, is because what the families were telling me is that, oh, this is great. They went to treatment. You're a miracle worker. We've been trying for years. Thank you so much. And they would call me up like 3 months later and say, nothing changed. You know, he did the 30 days in treatment and nothing changed. He's back out using. He's doing the same thing. You know, what am I going to do? And it just broke my heart. And I'm thinking, oh my God, because I'm codependent. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't charge to do this anymore. What am I doing? I'm bringing people and they're not getting it. They're not getting into recovery, and I'm bringing them into the front doors. Something's missing. There's a missing link. And so as I'm doing it and learning more and more about it, I just felt like I was taking advantage, so I needed to do more research. And I've been so fortunate. Eric's here too. We run Intervention 911 together. And I've been so fortunate to work with thousands of families and thousands of addicts within our company and helping them get into recovery and following the data. And right now, as we all know, I mean, I'm sure you guys see it on the news all the time. I was, called to be on, in LA, I was called, a friend of mine's a producer for The Insider, and he called me to be on that regarding the country western celebrity that committed suicide this week. You heard? Yeah, I heard about her. and and to report on what happened with her, because she suffered from that addiction, from addiction, and she was on Dr. Drew's. And so right now we're dealing with, in this country, we're dealing with a major epidemic, and especially for prescription drugs. I don't know if any of you seen this. I'll just play this little clip real quick on where Clinton was on CNN. Did anybody see that episode about him talking? Well, just play it really quick.
The red flags about this epidemic.
Well, I think I've been noticing, certainly in the hospital, where pain prescriptions being given out were increasing. But it was actually a call from former President Clinton. He called me a few months ago, and I never heard him sound quite like this. He told me about two friends of his who had both lost sons within a few days of each other due to prescription drug overdose. These were accidental deaths, and he was talking about it and said, look, someone dies in this country every 19 minutes in this way. It was a startling statistic, as you mentioned, surpassing now car crashes as the #1 accidental cause of death. So that certainly got my attention. That's what we started talking about. I subsequently have interviewed him specifically about this topic. I want you to listen to a short clip.
This may be a statistic that you know, I was surprised by, but 80% of the world's pain prescriptions are in this country. 80%. Does that surprise you?
No, because...
Is that a cultural problem?
It is cultural. People think, oh, I've got a headache, or I've got this in my elbows, or whatever. And look, I don't want to minimize, there are a lot of people who live courageous lives in constant pain. They're in pain all the time for reasons they can't control. They need relief, and they should get it. But there's no question that since we represent 5% of the world's people, and far less than 80% of the world's people with above average incomes, we got no business pocketing as many pills as we do.
Let me just give you a little bit more context for that, Soledad. We prescribe enough pain pills in this country to give every man, woman, and child a pill every 4 hours for 3 weeks. So these pain pills are just everywhere, and you're seeing some of the consequences.
Wow, the documentary airs this weekend, and it's fascinating. We've had lots of conversations about the risks of this and the dangers to people. Sanjay Gupta, thank you, Sanjay, appreciate it. It's called Deadly Dose, and it's going to air on Sunday night at...
So that's really why we're here today. That's the reality of what's happening in this country. And we just had an intervention training in Palm Springs, and 5 people from the UK came over, and they said the epidemic over there is just as bad. It's just as bad. And when I told you about my story on how when I got sober, it was marijuana, and it was drugs that didn't kill us, going from the abuse stages to the addiction stage. These drugs that we're dealing with today, with what they just said, every 19 minutes. So the time that we're here, what is that, 20, 46 people are going to die in the 2 hours that we're here tonight in this country alone from these prescription drugs. So when I hear that, and I hear that, doing an intervention and bringing somebody to treatment and it's not working, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. What are we doing in this industry? What are we going to do as professionals in this industry and really help the people, really help the private sector out there? And that's what we want to talk about, today. I'll go through this pretty quickly because I really wanted to. This morning I was at one of the classes and we did a question and answers, and I think it's a lot easier when people have real life examples and we could work with that. So if any of you feel, comfortable enough to come up and talk about, their situations of what they're dealing with, I think using that as a momentum to get, an example of what you could do if you know of a loved one. Because with these type of statistics out there, in this country alone, every person could get a pill every 4 hours. I mean, that's unheard of. For 3 weeks, every single person in this country, that's what's being prescribed today. So as you open the papers, like I told you, the lady, the the woman that just committed suicide, again, is another tragic story. You see every time you open up the newspaper, it's always here, always here. We're always watching it. Whitney Houston, another great loss. All these stories, I'm sure you all see them. We're not naive to any of this. So how do we end it? How do we end this horrific, epidemic that's running through our country? And I believe personally that, the old timers in AA that say, oh, you have to wait for the addict to hit a rock bottom. Has anybody heard that? Heard that? I believe that's a bunch of BS. Are you going to wait for the natural progression of cancer to take its course before you do something and intervene? The minute you see warning signs, people intervene for any other disease. Why are we not doing it with this disease? Intervene, because these kids, like I said, they're not even getting past, I would say a lot of these kids aren't even getting past the experimental stages. Experimental. They're just doing what I did, taking those handful of drugs and throwing them in their mouth, in high school and junior high. They're experimenting. They're not even in abuse or addiction yet, and they're dying. So what are we going to do? The doctors' diversion programs, I work really close with Dr. Harry from the Betty Ford Center, Dr. Skipper from Promises, all the leading treatment facilities out there. They're all coming up with this 5-year plan. And tonight I want to talk about what the 5-year plan really consists of and show you how it works with gambling addiction, eating disorders, any form of addiction, sex addiction, any one of them. This 5-year plan, you could implement it and get it to work. The statistics also show here that 40% of the 40 to 60% of the people relapse after drug and alcohol treatment. Has anybody heard those statistics? 40 to 60? I think it's more like we talked about it this morning. What I believe is after 30 days of treatment, I think it's more like 95% of the people relapse is what the reality is. If you only do 30 days of treatment, 95% of the people don't make it. So, this is all NATO, what they're saying today, that you need at least a minimum of 90 days. And when you talk about what is success, what is that 30 to, that 40 to 60% there? What is success? How do you measure success? I know the treatment centers out there. How do you think they measure success? Anybody have an idea? Year of sobriety. That's a good one. But how do they measure that? How do they know that it's a year of sobriety?
Probably if they call them, they still answer the phone.
That's a good one. He said if they call them and they still answer the phone. Exactly. It's called self-reporting. And as a friend of mine, John Southworth, would say, when they would call me, I went through like 6 treatment centers, and when they would call me, I'd be like, yeah, I'm doing fine, everything's great, I'm exercising, and he was like, exercising? He's sitting around watching porn and, doing cocaine all day long. That was his exercising. So self-reporting, can you really count on it? That's how we see self-reporting and 30 days treatment. What are the real numbers? How do we really figure out what that criteria is? How do we really know what works with this disease? What is it? What is going to be the answer for that? Is there any hardcore evidence base out there? Is there anything? Does anybody know of anything? We talked a little bit about it this morning. Anybody have any ideas on some hardcore evidence base? What's that? Drug test? Yep. Who does drug test?
PTI or something.
PTI?
Yeah,
Employers? That's a good one. Employers. Oh, God, I wish more employers would do drug tests. But drug courts? Hello? Do you think they're going to let convicted felons out if they're not following a strict protocol of their drug program? Right? Anybody know about the drug court program with the random drug testing?
well, I really don't
Hmm?
know that. I know there's presentation for that.
Yep.
These 35 like I'm asking me questions.
Yep. But the reality is most drug courts, I'll go by this in a few minutes, but most drug courts, they have an amazing program. I love their programs. They are amazing. They save people's lives. I don't ever want anybody to get to that point where they're committing felonies, but I really love their programs if they're able to get into a drug court. So if you have a loved one that's in drug court or committing felonies and they haven't killed anybody or anything like that, and you could go to the court and plead with them and ask the judge to put them in drug court, amazing programs. And today at the earlier lecture, they told me that this county has really good ones. The other hardcore evidence-based statistics are pilots programs. The pilots HIMSS program. And what that is a pilot needs to, as I talked a little bit about earlier, a pilot needs to go to 12-step meetings. They need to go to therapy, group therapy, one-on-one therapy, and random drug testing. So when you call them up, if they're not turning in their slips that they've been to all these appointments and their random tests with an outside source telling them, they're not going to let them fly. The FAA is not going to let them fly. Thank God. Hello, I do a lot of traveling. I was like, thank God they're doing something to protect our safety, anybody that likes to fly, right? So their program is really, really, really successful. I think it's 10 years long, their program for pilots. And doctor diversion programs, nurses, any high licensed professional, they have programs that have huge success rates. And they're not going to let a nurse or a doctor go back to work if there's not hard evidence-based statistics. They have to prove that they are clean and sober. And I believe it's the random drug testing. That's the thing that keeps people in recovery and motivated to go to their meetings because they have those court cards that they all sign. So the drug court, I was here speaking at the one in Brooklyn. Judge Ferdinand is the one that we spoke at a graduation at, and she was telling us it's a 2-year program, and I think, what were the statistics are? 67%. So 67% of the people that went through that program graduated successfully after 2 years. 67% is a lot better than 5 to 7% in 30-day treatment, isn't it? I mean, that's easy. That's easy math. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure that one out. This is the website. If you want to look at this website, and at the end of this, you could just take out your iPhone and shoot me an email if you want a copy of this, and I'll just forward you this presentation. But this website here gives you all the criteria for the pilots program, the HIMSS program. Their program, started in the 1970s. There's been about 4,500 pilots that have been through the program. 400 of them are with the United Airlines. 80 of them are currently enrolled. And I should put his name down here. The guy that gave me all these statistics, he works with the United Airlines pilot program. He's the one that told me that if they fail a test, one drug test, in that 10-year span, it's the lifetime of their licensure. If they want to fly, they're going to have to be in this program, period, or else they don't get their license if they're not in this program. They have a 92% success rate, with recovery at the 2-year rate, and only less than 10% of them relapse. And 8% of them decide to retire. They're the ones that just don't want to. They're so close to their, retirement, and they don't want to give up. They don't want to get sober. I've seen a lot of people like that. But in the pilots program, they fought really hard to get into this program. Dr. Skipper, again, he works at Promises in Malibu. This has been what he keeps all the data for the doctor diversion programs, and 79% with no relapse in 5 years. That is impossible that these numbers are realistic in today's age, and yet for the private sector, that everybody out there thinks you only need 30 days of treatment, are getting 5 to 7% success rate. 5 to 7. So what is the difference? I mean, with the program for the doctors, 23, here's just some more statistics. We'll go through it. Dr. Greg Skipper, he really understands that treatment is only the beginning. Treatment, when we talk about a timeline for the disease, when you look at any other disease, when you look at diabetes or you look at cancer or any other diagnosis, isn't there a timeline where they follow a certain protocol with that disease in order to be in treatment for a certain amount of time before it goes into remission? And why aren't we doing that? It works for all the doctors. So treatment, he believes, is only the very beginning. So the key components of treatment is the intervention, either a natural progression or a man-made progression or man-induced, where a professional intervention is what I do. A minimum of 90 days inpatient treatment, and the key word here is reevaluate. Reevaluate, because there is no cookie cutter that I'm going to tell you that your loved one does this, it's going to work for them. Everybody's different. So the key component in all of this is reevaluate. Sober living, reevaluate. Intensive outpatient, reevaluate. 12 steps, sorry, that's the only one that's continuing. You're not getting out of that one. That one is continuing, hopefully for the lifetime, as long as you live. Monitoring, you don't need to be drug tested the rest of your life, but monitoring is the drug testing component is really important for the beginning stages. We like to do it for 5 years minimum. So here's the timeline. Again, we'll go through this a little quicker here. The intervention, is the support. Again, an intervention is really, what I see is important. A part of this is where the doctor's diversion program comes in. They do the intervention on the doctors and say, if you don't abide by this certain protocol, we're going to take your license. But they don't get the family system involved, where the family system are enabling. The family system are doing things that are keeping the disease alive and not getting the education that's necessary. So that's where I believe they're dropping the ball with intervention, and that's why I feel fortunate that I could go in and educate families on the disease concept and show them, this is the most important component, show them, if I have a loved one suffering from an addiction, any type of them, gambling, sex, love, drugs, and as a loved one, am I supporting, over here's the line, am I supporting the recovery on this side, or am I supporting the disease on this side? Which one am I supporting? And there's no gray area. You can't be in the middle over here supporting each one. You're either supporting the addiction or you're supporting the recovery, and teaching them how to see that clearly. And it's like a light goes on. They're like, wow, all these years I've been supporting their addiction. And doing some of the things to support their recovery may be going against all your human nature, all your, against the grain of your human being, because it's really not comfortable at times. So then we have inpatient treatment. Again, like Dr. Skipper talked about, the very beginning stages, 28 days isn't even really a reality anymore. The only reason why it's a reality in today's world is because how many of you have health insurance? Have health insurance? Does your insurance pay for 90 days? Yours would? Wow. You're lucky. I need yours. Anybody else's pay for 90? No, right? Nobody's paying for 90 these days. You're one of the fortunate. The people that I work with, I'll call and run and verify benefits, and 99.9% are maximum of 30. So what we're doing is we're putting them in their 90 days or their 30 days of treatment, and then what we're doing is putting them in sober living, and then they're going to intensive outpatient, when they get out of treatment, and they're able to get their 90 days that way. Sober living, again, is, a really huge component for, the longer the better. Keep them in there a year if you can. Then we have the intensive outpatient. All of these things are monitoring, is the drug testing, and then, 12-step support group. Nobody does this alone. But in that timeline of intervention, inpatient treatment, sober living, monitoring, intensive outpatient, 12-step. Who oversees that? With a doctor, they have a case manager that oversees that. Oh, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. So they have a case manager that oversees that 5-year plan. Somebody that's going to hold them accountable to that 5-year plan. And I think that's been the missing link. Because if you go from the interventionist, they meet me, and I say, okay, now you need to go to Michael's house to treatment. So I get them to Michael's house to treatment. And remember what I talked about where the ball got dropped and the families were calling me up and saying, Ken, what did we do wrong? We did everything you asked. Why aren't they sober? Because there's nobody overseeing this whole process. So there's the intervention. Then you go into inpatient treatment. They go to Michael's house. They stay in Michael's house for 30 days. Then they go to sober living, and they stay there for 90 or another 60 days. And they go to intensive outpatient. They're doing the monitoring while they're there. They're getting therapy while they're there, and they're going to 12-step meetings. But nobody's overseeing all that. Is the therapist of the intensive or the inpatient going to follow this whole plan? They don't have the resources to do that. I mean, how are they going to follow somebody for 5 years? They're treating them while they're in treatment. Is the sober living people going to do that? They're not going to do that. Is the monitoring company going to do that? They're not going to do that. They'll monitor them for that. So the one thing that we've been missing in this whole component is the case management. Ongoing case management, I think it's really important to just, what is case management? What are they really monitoring? Some people need the therapy. Some people are going to go back to school. I talked to some people today that, were in their disease for many years, and then they went back to school. They got 5 years clean, and now they're back in school. I mean, you go back to school, you get jobs, everybody's different, one-on-one counseling, doing fun things in recovery, having some kind of fun, whatever, excites you. Some people need to be on medication when they're in recovery. So medication compliance, these are really important. And then we go into, what's going to get people to get to that point. And what we do as an intervention is we look for the motivators, the leverage, the consequences. Does anybody wake up in the middle? Does anybody know someone that's in recovery or in recovery themselves besides me? Some people know? Okay. So did they wake up in the morning, if it was you or if it was somebody else, did they wake up in the morning and say, God, it is awful nice out there today. There was no clouds. I saw the water when I woke up this morning, and there was no clouds, and it was clear, and the water was crystal clear, no waves or anything on it. I'm going to call the Betty Ford Center and see if they have a bed. I'm going to go there. I think I want to go on vacation for 90 days and go to Betty Ford, see what's going on down there. Hello? Does that happen? Right? Every single person has had a motivator to get them to get to the point of wanting some kind of change in their life. So I don't care if it was produced by an interventionist or if it was, produced by the natural progression of this disease. Every one of them had a motivator to get to that point to say, I want to change. And the leverage, this is what I help family members with, because with the licensing board, with the drug court, they have huge leverage. You don't go in their program of recovery in the drug court, you're going back to prison. You don't go in the licensing board, you lose your license. My job as an intervention is to figure out what the motivators is, how to leverage it, and what are going to be the consequences, the bottom lines. Is it money? Is it work? Is it their connection with their family? Is it, jail? Is that going to be a motivator? Is it the spouse kicking them out into jail? Is it a divorce? Separating the kids? Is it a trip? Is it no trip? Is it the police chasing them? See, we have some police here today. Police chasing them? Is it cars? What is it? What is the motivator? What is the leverage? There is no cookie cutter in this. In my experience, I've never been able to go into a family system and say, if you do A, B, and C, we'll get them into treatment and get them into long-term care. Every single human being, it's kind of like right now, I have goals in my life and I have dreams in my life just like we all do, and every one of ours are different. If we were to go around the room, we would all have different goals, motivators. So it's really about digging and figuring out what they are. Before I get into the motivators of how to dig and figure out what they are, I really wanted to go over, like we talked about cancer, the signs of addiction. At the meeting this morning, some of the students were talking about they have friends or they see friends that aren't, that are using more, taking more prescriptions. What are the warning signs? We call that behaviors change, attitude change, attendance change. Certain things in their lives have changed and we're watching for them. When it's cancer, and you get a little mole on your back, you go in and, you ask the doctor, what is this thing? That's a healthy person, right? That's a healthy person saying, oh, what is this spot? I'm going to go look at this. Some people kind of wait a little bit longer, right? They're like, oh, it's not really that bad. It looks like a little pimple, on the lip over here, on the nose. Oh, maybe it's just a little pimple or a little, irritation. And then some people wait a little bit longer, where it gets in the eye and it gets, on the eyes and under the chin, it gets a little bit bigger. And these are all examples of skin cancer. So when you parallel them with drug addiction and alcoholism, you see all the warning signs. You see them. You watch people deteriorate slowly down this path. When families come to me and ask me for help, that's where I get them. When it looks like this. When they're in their disease of addiction, this is when the family comes screaming and asking for help. That's how bad the cancer is. That's the reality of when and my goal is that I don't have a job anymore. My goal is that the community around the people will know the warning signs and they will know the actions to take, so they don't need to wait until it gets that bad with the disease. They don't need to end up in jail. They don't need to, have all those other things happen to them. So one of the things I like to talk about is the full disclosure. Everybody needs to know. When I do an intervention, it's full disclosure. I don't go in there and say, something bad is going to happen to you if you don't get into treatment or recovery. I give them the whole information. I did this presentation with Dr. Scott Hamilton, and he is the doctor that runs the medical diversion program in Mississippi. And Mississippi, if some of you don't know, is the state that was the first state to get some of the ingredients behind the counter for that people make with the crystal meth labs. And he was part of that process with their state. And I think it dropped 80%, wasn't it? I think the crystal meth labs that they busted in that state because of that law that they were able to pass dropped 80%. But his thought on this is, I was like, wow, a doctor's talking about a carrot and a stick. It doesn't make sense. But he was talking about you need to have the motivator, the carrot, that's the carrot, the motivator, and then you need to have the stick, which is going to be, something, a consequence. If you don't have a consequence, like I said, nobody woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to go to Betty Ford today. There was a consequence that was in their life that motivated them. And so finding out what the consequence is and then having something positive dangling in front of them to motivate them. So you need to have this balance is the way he interpreted it. So a skilled interventionist, in my opinion, would be, minimize the fallout. Does anybody want to see their loved one in jail? Does anyone want to see their loved one suffering the legal consequences? I don't think so. I don't know anybody that wants them, to go down that road. So I would like to minimize the consequences instead of waiting for the natural progression. And we certainly don't want to see them dead. So finding the motivators, here's a whole bunch of things that we talked about. What is the motivator? How do we use that as leverage? And then turn it into a consequence. And when I was working with Dr. Scott Hamilton in Mississippi, you know, I would always call it with family members. I love this part. I would call it, I kind of like to soften it up a little bit. So I would say, oh, you need to put healthy boundaries into place. You know, you need to, you know, put some healthy boundaries, and you need to really, you know, to get them motivated. He's like, bull crap, they need a consequence. I was like, oh dear. I said, well, if a doctor could say it, okay, I like that. So, but we have to have consequences. Remember what I told you about my story? If I didn't get fired, that was a consequence that motivated to get me into treatment. Even though I was going in to manipulate the system, it still got me in the door. It was a consequence. So what are consequences that we have with the families that we work with is we put family contracts together. So a family contract could look like one of the stories that I did. I love this story where I worked with this family, and they owned a business together, a husband and wife. And they owned this business, and they were really successful. They had 2 kids, and they did an intervention, and the interventionist said, when he got done after hours of him screaming at the interventionist, and what he did is the neighbors that came into the intervention process, the neighbors were like, they said, you know, he would say, well, you have tax evasion. I know you haven't paid your taxes in years, and I'm turning you into the IRS. So that neighbor went running, hello, right? The other neighbor, and you cheated on your wife, and she doesn't know about it. I'm going to tell your wife. So what did that neighbor do? That neighbor went running, right? So finally, the only one left was the neighbor across the street that was a retired judge's wife, and she had nothing, he had nothing on her, hello. So she's left there with the wife, and the interventionist left and said, you know what, I think it's time for you to get a divorce. You know, he's never going to get better, and, good luck to you. And he left. He got on a plane and he left this family system. And it broke my heart, because I always tell families that I work with, as long as they're alive and breathing, do not give up. Do not give up. Because you will find their motivator. You will find something that's going to get them, engaged in recovery. So what we did with him is I went in and did the intervention, and I told the wife, I said, well, it's only me and your neighbor, hello, the 3 of us going in. The sister wouldn't even come. The mother wouldn't even come. So I said, there's pretty much a good chance that we're not going to get him to go to treatment on that day. I said, we're not going to get him. I'm not going to lie to you and say we're going to get him to treatment. I said, but what we could do is negotiate with him. So we negotiated with him after hours of going back and forth to put a contract together. And the contract stated that I said, okay, you're an intelligent man. You have a successful business. You know what alcoholism does. It robs families, right? Absolutely. But you know how to stop. How many of you heard that one before? I know how to stop. So he says, and I said, okay, great. You know how to stop. I said, why don't we just put this little contract together that if you are to test net positive, then there would be consequences. He said, I'll sign whatever you want me to sign, because I'm never going to drink again a day of my life. Right? How many of you heard that? So I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm thinking to myself, I was like, okay. So I got the hook. He's singing, I'm reeling him in. Here he comes. I hooked him. So I said, okay, let's go down there. So my wife's like, his wife was like, he's really intelligent. I think we better bring this to the family attorney. So I said, great. So me and her went down to the family attorney. He had an alcoholic in his life. He understood what we were trying to do. He put this contract together that if he was to test positive, refuse a test, that would be considered a positive, that all the money in their bank account will be transferred into another bank account. So he would have no access. All credit cards will be turned off. All real property will be put only into the wife's name. The company will be put only into the wife's name until he was clinically approved by a physician in addiction medicine after 90 days of inpatient treatment. So the attorney drew up this really aggressive contract, and we bought it to him, and then we played into him, his ego. We played into it, and we said, we know you're never going to drink again, and that's why we're protecting you and your family from that disease. Now you and your wife and your attorney need to sign this. And he said, great, signs it. So, what was it, like 3 months later? 3 months later, she calls me. It's Thanksgiving. She's crying in the garage hysterically. He's drunk. I don't know what to do. So she asked him to do a test. He must have figured out on the internet, you know those things that you buy? Hello? Anybody hear of those things on the internet you can buy? The fake urine and all this other crap. You drink this drink and you get this, random test and you beat the test. So she goes, I gave him a test and he beat it. She's like, it's not showing that he's drunk and I smell the alcohol. I don't get it. I can't do this anymore, Ken. Crying hysterically, I can't do it. I'm tired. Remember, she already had an intervention. Then she had the one with me. And then it's 3 months later, she's exhausted. So I said, just stick with it. Just stick with it. The next time, it doesn't say where the test is going to be held. So the next time you think he's drinking, go to the bedroom and ask him, as she did a few weeks later, and said, come on, honey, we're going to the hospital. And he's like, for what? And he goes, we're going to do a drug test down there. We're going to have him draw blood this time. Hello? What do you think he did then? He didn't like that idea. So he's like, F you, blah, 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 blah. Started screaming at her like she's the crazy one. How dare you, don't trust me, blah, 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 blah. All insane. But again, that refusal is a positive test in that contract that we drew up. So that contract that we drew up is now enforceable. So she called her attorney, she called me, and I said, act like nothing is happening. Act like nothing's happening today. Go to work like nothing's happening. What is the normal routine of the day? She goes, he goes to work around 12 o'clock. I go down to work and he leaves at 3 o'clock. He works the morning, I work the afternoon. I said, perfect. When he leaves for work in the morning, call the locksmith, have every single lock in the house completely changed. Change the locks, change the garage door opener, everything. So she did that. When you're done with that, go down to your bank and don't take his name off the accounts. Transfer every single dime into your own personal account with that documentation, with your attorney, with that power of attorney that you have. Perfect. She does that. Then go back to the house and cancel every single credit card. And then go into work like nothing happened. And go into work knowing that he's going to leave at 3 with the locksmith there to change the locks on the business. So she does that. He goes home at 3 o'clock thinking he beat her, blah, blah, blah. I got this made. He goes home, pushes the little garage door opener, nothing opens. So he calls, what the hell's going on with you? Screaming, call the attorney. That's all she had to say. Call the attorney. And so he lived out there for about three or 4 days. He lived in his car. He had enough cash on him to keep him, drinking for that three or 4 days. And he finally went to treatment for 90 days. So the story is with a contract, with a family contract, there's ways to do that. There's ways to get people to finally to surrender to their recovery. Let's see, recovering. So these are just like the 5-year plan. Again, more about the 5-year plan. I believe that, if you're only doing 28 days, not using evidence-based, you're doing more harm. Educating the public. Recovery needs motivators. Again, we talked about the motivators. Without a motivator, no one's going to get sober. So recovery is continuum care. Recovery from addictions is a 5-year plan. Recovery needs to have a motivator. This is exactly, I just did this presentation in Los Angeles at the LA Sober Living Coalition Convention. and Dr. Greg Skipper did his presentation right after mine, it might have always been the same exact thing. The same exact thing. All it's talking is about you need a motivator, you need consequences, you need to have a 5-year plan, and this is where people get those opportunities of long-term recovery. So if you have a loved one out there, and it didn't take that from me, and to be quite honest, if you follow this plan, what is it in our company? We have, how many people? Like, I would say 20% need to go into year 2 of monitoring. If I have a solid family with consequences, after 12 months, usually a year, they don't even need to go to the 2nd year of monitoring or case management. They don't need it because they know what to do by following their case manager's recommendations. But everybody's talking about, just like cancer, reevaluate. If you and the family see a loved one with that's struggling, and you see warning signs, get them back into their therapist. Make sure that they're going to their meetings, or create the motivator. So this is just, a little bit about when I talk about, the most important part now. What we've been doing the last couple years now is we opened up a couple sober livings in Palm Springs. And this is the part, and a colleague of mine, he says this all the time, this is the part that really kills me, is that, the families will have an addict that, just got sober. And she'll say, oh, Johnny's doing so much better now. Johnny looks better. Johnny sounds better. Johnny's doing so good. Johnny. And we're like, well, really, Johnny's not. He's not working with his sponsor. He's not going to meetings. He's fighting us on everything that we ask him to do. Oh, no. Johnny looks better. He's doing fine. Because the family's used to seeing him one way. And so I just feel like throwing my hands up in the air and saying, I give up. I'm fighting the battle, and the family's on the disease side. I'm the only one that's trying to help them fight the addiction, and the addict's manipulating them because he sounds better and he looks better. And it's the worst thing that we struggle with right now in the sober living, is families don't understand that there's got to be a long-term plan implemented. And again, some only need 12 months, some only need, but doctors, they did it with doctor diversion programs, they needed 3, and then the 3 went to 5. So that's the one thing, the questions, if you guys, have anything, if you want this presentation, just shoot it on your iPhone or your phone right now, shoot me an email. We'll email you this presentation. If you have any questions after tonight, I'm always available. I'd love to help any way I can. And then now I wanted to go into some examples of anybody that has any questions on their loved ones. Anybody brave enough? Yes, sir.
I want to ask, how do you balance privacy, and the rights of the client and the family? Them interacting with each other and everything. How do you balance that?
The private
Patient confidentiality involving the family.
So his question is how do we balance the privacy of the patient and confidentiality? And with our case managers, the way that works for that time that we're working with them, the family, we really don't, we don't go to their sponsor and say, what is in their 4th step? Tell us what's going on with these people. We want to know all the gory details. That's not what we do. All we do is we call their therapist and say, we don't even ask the therapist how their treatment's going. We say compliant or non-compliant. Compliant or non-compliant. The sponsor, compliant or non-compliant. That's drug testing, compliant or non-compliant. That's all we ask of them, is are they in compliance of their recovery program? And again, we don't dictate what the recovery program, some people need medication, some people don't like 12 steps, some people are in other programs, some people are in religious programs. So whatever their recovery process looks like, we just want to know if they're in compliance with that. So we don't really break anonymity or, confidentiality with that. Confidentiality.
A lot of times when we work with families, we're getting the call from the family from the intervention side, so there is no confidentiality requirement on our part. And our belief, confidentiality is important for people, but I think confidentiality kills more people, and it really helps because they can use that as a way to divide. With our case management or with anything where we're obligated, we get releases for people so that we have releases in place, and there are tools we can use to work around that if we need to.
Uh-oh, am I getting arrested? It was years ago I sold drugs. I'm sorry. I see him walking down here, I'm like, oh. Going out the back door. So yeah, as Eric was saying, we are a firm believer, and where we have it with family members, like in treatment centers, that damn confidentiality law is, like he said, kills more people, because when they pull a release from a family member, what that tells me, they're back in their disease. They're manipulating, they're placating, they're playing they're in their disease, because if they weren't in their disease, then again, you don't want to know the gory details of their treatment, but you need to know at least if they're compliant or not. So if they go into treatment after we do an intervention and they pull a release, we look at that as a positive test. We look at that as if they didn't even go to treatment. All consequences are immediately implemented, because that tells us that there's something still going on. We work with the treatment centers, and they're amazing. The ones that are out there today, there's still some that are working back in the early 80s. We had one, and I always love to mention him, but I always forget who he is. It was in Clearwater, Florida, and this doctor had 30 years sober, and he knew better because he got everybody sober, and they're going to do it my way or no way. And the family was like, we took a brother there, and he did really well, so we want our other son to go there. And so he goes down there, and this person that we did the intervention on was suffering with dual diagnosis, and I think it was primary psych. It wasn't even primary alcohol, it was primary psych. And so this guy knew nothing about psych. So we're like, we need to get him to a place that really specializes in psych. Look at all these things the wife says he does. This is just not alcoholism. There's something else going on that's deeper. Don't tell me how to do my job, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay. And he went home with his graduation certificate that he completed treatment. So now the wife, and he goes right back home using and acting out because he didn't really get the help that he needed. He didn't get the right medication that he needed. So there's some treatment centers that are like that, but the ones nowadays are much more, more educated in dual diagnosis and understand the importance of really treating the people. Yes, sir.
I hear you talking a lot about, long-term recovery and stuff like that. You're talking about treatment centers, but in my case, I tried to get in all these treatment centers. I had no health insurance. They're telling me $25,000 to get to this place, right? So what I ended up doing is I found a long-term recovery community.
Yep.
We have those here. South Carolina. I got into this long-term recovery community. I went to Anderson, South Carolina, do vision recovery. I got away from everything. I worked a 12-step program, and I come back and I've been successful so far, with my 12-step recovery. Do you guys get into the recovery communities or anything like that? Where does it cost so much?
So what kind of program was that? Tell me a little bit more, because I'm not.
Vision recovery in Anderson, South Carolina.
Okay, so.
We have the Owl's Nest, we have Eddie Lake Recovery Community in Sumter.
And what are the costs for those?
It's very minimum, $400 or $500 to get in.
Nice.
New Visions is $90 to get in. You have to get a job. You have to get a sponsor to 12-step program, start working on a program. But they do want you to detox first. I did have to go to detox first, and after that. But I hear the talk of treatment centers and all that, but everybody can't get into a treatment center. That's what happens in alcohol.
So it's quite.
They don't have the funds to do that.
I hear you loud and clear. And if you could send me an email with that information, because that is our #1 complaint with families. We know of a free place up in Boise, Idaho. We know some other places that are free, but do you have to be a resident of South Carolina?
No.
No? Okay, because a lot of them, they have to be a resident of that state and have an ID.
When I was at Eddie Lake Recovery, it's in Sumter, we had people coming from Texas, from New York, from all over.
Nice, nice. So yeah, if you could send us that, because we're always looking for that, because that's the #1 blocker for, treatment today, is finances. People just don't have the resources to, stay in treatment for 90 days and then stay accountable for a year in sober living. They don't have that. So we have a few that we do use, like I said, in Boise, Idaho, California, but you have to have a California ID for the one that's by us at the ranch. There's a couple up in Hollywood that are free, so we have some, but I don't think we'll ever have enough. So thank you for that, because that's really important. Yes, sir.
With drug and how do you feel about all these doctors pushing Suboxones and even some treatment centers I've heard pushing them for long periods of time?
That's not very nice. You asked me, how do I feel about Suboxone? And this is recorded, but I have to be honest about it. I look at it as methadone, and I love Suboxone for detox. I think it's a great drug for detox. I think it makes the detox for heroin a lot easier and alcohol a lot easier. But I am not a fan of long-term use. I do. Just the drug company's going to boo me and they're going to yell at me or get upset. Oh, he doesn't even know what he's talking about. But what I do know is people that are on Suboxone and they do the long term, a lot of treatment centers won't detox them off of it, just like methadone, because it's too fatal. It gets too dangerous when they get on these higher level of Suboxone. And, I haven't really seen it work. Like methadone, I believe in methadone. If they've tried 12 steps and everything else and that they just can't get sober and methadone and they're on a maintenance and that they're able to stay stable. But how many do that? 2%? The rest are there to get high, I think. And I think the same thing with Suboxone. We won't take people in our sober living that are on that long-term plan. If you're on a 21-day detox, we'll think about it, but we would rather have them detox while they're in treatment. But that's my personal opinion.
This is responsive to the question about the HIPAA laws, the confidentiality laws. The terms dangerous to himself, herself, or others, that's out of the question then. HIPAA's gone. You have the responsibility to take care of that person however it is necessary. Also, there was a big case in California probably 40 years ago where a psychologist had gotten a threat that this person was going to kill someone. He did not report it, and now there's a reporting law. If someone has threatened someone, you as a therapist must report that to that person. And also to the authorities. But when there's dangerousness to self or others, then HIPAA is gone.
But I love that. That is a great law that helps. But with the addicts, a lot of the addicts are so manipulative. They know that, and they know what to say and how to maneuver. Just like I said I was when I got sober. I wasn't there to get sober. I was there to manipulate the system. I knew what to say, what not to say, and I was in a psych ward where I went to treatment.
I'm on the therapist side. And we certainly worked in a community mental health center which had inpatient. It only came about when you were just a kid. But there was a law that was passed that there were now community mental health centers, and all the institutions were then rubble after that, and then now the psych units are used for something else. But in that situation, we referred to it as the 28-day cure. That's when the insurance ran out. They got another 28-day cure, and they're out on the street, and no long-term care as needed so often in state institutions.
Thank you. Yes.
How aggressive do you think a family member should be if a loved one is in a diversion program, first time of being in trouble with the law, and you think the plan that has codependency that you know that loved one has, should you, as a family member, approach that program and ask questions, or should you stay out of it?
So our question is if you have a loved one in treatment or in the court system? Okay, in the courts, not drug court, but in the court system. And where's the balance between codependency and trying to get into the court to find out what they're doing versus stepping back and letting them...
The child is codependent with her former person that she lived with for almost 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
She's not with that person any longer, but those 7 years of being codependent have not been addressed. Now that the plan's been set in front of her with a diversion program, there's no requirements there for counseling, therapy, or anything. And as a family member, we know it's needed.
So
it's an adult. So, do you just stay back and let them go, or do you step in there and say,
yeah,
what we see on this side of the door, you're on that side of the door.
So the question, did everybody hear the question? What is codependency? Go ahead. Sure. Can you give her the microphone, please?
One vocal cord, you can't talk very loud. I did do that, and knowing that there was dependency, I actually went to the judge and spoke with him and asked for a court-mandated treatment, a long-term treatment, and he gave us that. In answer to this gentleman's question, and I totally agree with you, this is one of the most difficult states to get any information or any help. It is so expensive to have rehab. The school system can't help you. The police department can't help you. You're on your own. And this is a very rampant problem in this area here. I'm not originally from here, but I'll tell you, the problem in this school system and those drugs are out there everywhere. And you got to do whatever you can do. First, you got to pray. But you go to the court and you ask for court-mandated rehab, long-term, and they will write that for you.
What is yours with drug and alcohol?
Ours costs $10,000.
Is yours
would probably never
yours is
pay
with
off.
drug and alcohol, though, and I think she's
No
asking
drugs.
about codependency.
Heroin.
Heroin, yeah. And I think
which is easy to get here.
But I think the question is how do you get somebody that's codependent into treatment?
Through the judge.
Right?
You ask a judge,
and
he'll do a court order.
And when you're dealing with other addictions, like, food addiction, it's when they get really sick, or sex addiction. Codependency is really hard. I don't know if there's really anything you can do in that situation, unfortunately. I think it's really hard to get any legal system, because what are the laws that are being broken? It isn't like drugs or alcohol. So to get somebody mandated into treatment for codependency, I don't think that is possible. I don't know.
To your question about should you share that with the judge, I think that you have to look at the fact that addiction is a family disease and you're affected by her behavior. And what you need to do is you need to take a stand against her behavior that is not in recovery, and you need to let the judge know exactly what's going on, what your input is, and ask him to help you create something for the family that will help all of you, including your daughter who's in this program. And I think you owe it to your daughter to share as much as you can with the judge about what's going on. I think that that's important. I think you should, as a parent or as a loved one, advocate for recovery and not advocate for your son or daughter. Because if you advocate for recovery, your son or daughter is going to come out on the plus side. If you advocate for your daughter, who knows if she's good, if you don't advocate for that process, who knows what's going to happen. The judge is only going to go by what she tells her. So I would say go for it. I think you should go for it.
Yeah, I agree. Eric was saying that, to go for it and bring it up to the judge. But again, I don't know if the judge's hands might be tied, but you never know. There may be a miracle. The judge may see something, and I've seen lots of miracles happen. So as long as you're, again, reporting what you're seeing as the disease, I think, and as long as you have examples that are hard evidence-based examples of her codependency and bringing that to the judge, it can't do any harm, right? The judge could look at it and throw it away and say, oh, she's crazy, meaning you. But they could say, wow, I'm dealing with something like this right now, and maybe they do need counseling. So taking the steps, I agree with Eric. I think doing something is better than nothing.
And email Ken, there are lots of good programs for codependent people in the country that are 1 week intensive, 2 weeks intensive, 4-week programs. There's lots of good resources out they cost money, but they're not as expensive as a full-on treatment program, and that might be an option. And it may start the dialogue between you and your daughter about what you hope for her for a healthy lifestyle. And that's a great way to do it, to go into it, to say, I care about you. I want the judge to make the best decision for your process where you're at, and I need to share with him that. I'm doing this because I love you, not for any other reason than to help support your recovery.
I've tried that, but the child is stating that since they are no longer with the addict, that life is all peachy keen. And I, as an educated person, aside from a mother, know that you don't live in that kind of a lifestyle for that many years and walk away and just it's back into fairyland.
And I'm a huge huge advocate for documentation. So you have documents that you've given that judge. So the next time something is to happen, again, the more documents that you gather, the easier it will be down the road. So just staying on that track. Is there a question over there?
As far as the intervention 911 5-year plan at a national level, what is being looked at, especially with Obamacare and evidence-based medicine dictating a lot of practices and changes, it seems to me the same things that get an addict or an alcoholic into treatment are also present in the country with the spurring of mass shooting, mental health, and so also looking at the impact on our tax dollars, the potential for having more of a comprehensive drug program is what's being done nationally to support what you're.
So his question was, what is being done nationally to support the 5-year plan? Right now with the Obamacare, I know there's some people out in Washington that are advocating towards recovery and what do they do. And I think the way it's written right now is, from what I'm hearing from the different people that are out there, is that if you go to treatment, to any treatment center, in order to pay for that, for that care, to pay for that service, you're going to need to have evidence-based statistics. So they're going to be looking for, like the doctors or the drug courts, with the random testing. So it's not going to be self-reporting anymore. So we think, that John Southworth, a colleague of ours, is saying that they're looking at testing for 12 months after they leave treatment to give from an outside source. It's not going to be that treatment center that's going to be, oh yeah, we're testing them, then it's self-reporting. So an outside source, like a First Lab or some outside laboratory that collects the samples and is able to report back that these are the statistics. So they're going to be looking for that in order to pay. So a lot of the treatment centers, I think Betty Ford and a couple of them out there are now doing 12 months of monitoring. We're doing it with our sober living clients. So anybody that comes into our sober living, we're giving them a free 12 months of testing. They just have to pay for the test, but we'll enroll them in the program. That normally costs $3,500, but we just want to get those statistics up there. Yes, sir.
How would you go about bringing somebody's attention, an addict or an alcoholic, how would you go about bringing to their attention that they are an addict or an alcoholic and they need help when they're in denial the whole time? They will not accept the fact that they have a problem with anything. How would you go about bringing that up to them?
So, do you have somebody you're thinking about?
Yeah,
a family member? Have you approached it at all?
Yeah, the whole family tells them they're an alcoholic or whatever. It's in constant denial. What else could you do?
So what are some of the examples that the family does to tell him that he's an addict? Is it a he or she? He, okay.
We just tell him he's an alcoholic. He goes through plenty of money constantly. Different ways, like we tell him every day, he needs to stop. Things are getting bad, this and that, but he's constantly not.
Okay.
That's the problem.
And he just ignores it, right?
Right. Because he can't get in trouble because he does nothing wrong, like he doesn't go out drinking and driving or committing crimes or anything. He works. He thinks everything's peachy. How would you go about,
And do you have other family members that believe as you do? Is there anybody that doesn't believe as you do? So everybody supports that he's an addict and alcoholic. That's usually the easy, then it's easy. If everybody believes that he's an alcoholic and wants him to change, it's a lot easier than having a codependent that is sitting there saying, oh no, you're not an alcoholic, you're doing fine. Because then you got to fight that battle too. But if everybody's on the same page, that they want him to get help, that's what we talked about here about motivators. What are going to be the consequences? Because you telling an alcoholic or an addict that they're an addict or an alcoholic, what is that? It's like, water off the bat. Okay, sure. I mean, I remember I had this one guy when I was in my addiction, and he was like, if you keep using, you're an addict, and if you keep using, I'm going to go tell your parents. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. What did I do? I'd stop hanging out with him, and I'd only hang out with him when I was sober, when I wasn't really loaded. So, regarding your question, is there needs to be a motivator. There needs to be a consequence. There has to be something that's going to break the cycle of his addiction. So what are the things, this is where I work with families, what are the things that motivate him? Like what makes him tick? What makes him happy? What makes him, is it his work? Is it his family? What is it that makes him?
I don't know the situation, but I would assume that this is not a child that you can put in timeout. This is an adult.
All of them are, yeah, 99%. Yep.
Took her getting to that point, and at that point when she came out of that coma and she realized, wow, I think there's a reason for me to live, no matter what we did for years. So, what do you do in a situation like that when the person says, I'm fine, I don't have a problem?
Yep.
And that, in your case, the person's not driving and they can't be arrested.
Yep.
And a motivator is what? I'm going to take away your car keys? I don't know.
And you're trying to intervene before they hit rock bottom, so.
I love hearing that. So you had one that you tried for a year until she went into a coma. Nothing was able to happen, right? So what do you do for an adult? What do you do? What do you do to create that rock bottom? And this is what gets my blood flowing. I love this stuff because every single person is different. I can't tell you what your family member is going to be the same as hers. But there's something that makes every single human being tick. Every one of us sitting in this room, there's something we can't live without. Something we can't live without. And we would be devastated if we had to live without this one thing. And that's our goal, is digging in the family system. So, thank God, is she in recovery now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. So thank God we don't.
That was rock bottom.
Yep.
She was pretty much dead. And then they found her in time to bring her back. She was in a coma for a week. She came out of it, and it was the wall she had to hit. But it was many years of this.
Yep.
So.
And my goal in these type of series that we're doing, the drug, in 2 weeks, is it? The drug court is going to be here. So come back in 2 weeks because the drug court is going to be speaking. Next week. Okay, next week, next Thursday. Come back and ask the questions for him on how to raise a legal rock bottom. You know, what is the criteria, I guess is a good way to put it, but what is the boundaries that need, or what are the things that need to happen in order to get somebody enrolled in the drug court program? So those will be questions, but with your example, you're saying he doesn't break the law, right? So he doesn't break the law, so that one doesn't work, but everybody wants him to get into recovery. So does he have a spouse? So is the spouse willing to leave? So see, that tells me he's really far into his disease. He's already walked away from the relationship. So that one wouldn't work.
What makes it crazy is they're separated and they still live together.
That's not separated. Hello? That's an enabler.
Well, I think this illustrates a good point, is that, you know, we have two people here who both, their perception, and this is no judgment on you guys because you're like every other family in America, but your perception is we did everything we could, we had to wait for the rock bottom. And that's not actually true. There is a lot of things that family can do that are fairly easy to do, but because you're the family, you don't realize what they are and you can't pick them up. This is why having a skilled interventionist or a skilled person outside the family come in and help you with this piece is really, really important, because just what we just learned in just 2 minutes is that, all right, well, there's someone who's separated, but they're not really separated. So he's still getting something from that person. There hasn't been a final cut. And there's probably going to be an issue with the job, and there's probably going to be a source of finance that comes into play here. The other piece that's important is that one of the things that an intervention really does well is it takes all of the people who are in that family system and puts them moving in the same direction at the same time, which becomes much more powerful than, I don't know if it's your dad or your brother, but you saying, hey, I think you need to stop drinking, and his wife or spouse saying, hey, I think you need to stop drinking. It does it all at the same time, and it creates an event. And that event is much more powerful than 5 or 6 people in the family wanting him to stop, asking him to stop every day, but not really doing it in a cohesive way with a full plan. And that's really what an intervention is about. And that's really how an intervention can help you. It's a structured, it's an organized, it's an attack on the addiction that gets everyone on the same page. And Ken will spend 6 to 8 hours with a family on a pre-intervention talking about these issues. Well, you're separated, but you haven't left. What do you guys in the family think about that? And then the family can work together and resolve those issues that are blocking and allowing him to stay using, to get him to a point where he'll be motivated, so you don't have to wait till he goes into a coma for a week and you're worried that you're going to lose him. Because that's a lose-lose for everybody. So it is a process, it is an event, but it's a really skilled person who can help you make sure that all of it happens at the same time and that it can be effective in really creating that change.
So with them, I'd love to go into more about it. So you could always email me and ask questions, but I really think that, like Eric's saying, is you all have to be on the same page. You already have that. She's living with him still, so I would dig deeper and say, well, who's the house? Who's on the lease, or who owns the house?
She's left the board. He wouldn't have a problem with it by himself. So if everybody left or anything, he wouldn't have a problem with it.
Perfect. Perfect. So yeah, and exactly. She got a good example right here. Get him out.
He can make his own money.
How does he make a living?
He has his own business.
Who are his clients in his business?
Insurance.
Okay, so insurance carriers. So what if you were to all come together? And again, this is just thinking off the top of my head. Don't take this to heart that I'm saying you need to do this, because that's not what I'm saying. I would really need to dig, but you need to cut off the financial resources. So where he makes his money, if you own your own business, where I make my money, we own our own company. You go to the treatment centers that were referring interventions to me and saying, Ken's out there Ken's getting high, then what do you think those treatment centers are going to do? They're going to cut me off their list and they're not going to refer to me. But you don't do that without full disclosure like we talked about before. You go sit him down as a family unit and say, if you choose not to go, and you have to have a bed waiting for him, even if it's a place like he was talking to, a free bed, it doesn't matter. You have a bed waiting for him in treatment and say, if you choose not to go to treatment today, that's okay. We're not here to twist your arm, you're an adult. We can't make you do anything. But if you choose not to do that, we're not going to turn a blind eye anymore as a family and watch you commit suicide every day in front of us, playing Russian roulette with that gun, waiting for the day that you're going to be in the coma or wake up, not wake up because you overdose or wake up in your vomit and, and die. We're not waiting for that anymore. We're not sitting back anymore. We love you too much. So we're going to figure out where the money comes in. And we're going to contact every single contact that you have, and we're going to let them know that you're an alcoholic choosing not to get help and to stop using your services until you surrender and get help. You cut off the finances. That's mine was finances. My job fired me. It was my finances that motivated me. Every single person, I was telling the class this morning, I did one and it was 2 cats, his car, and his condo. It wasn't his 2 grown daughters, right? What the hell's that? It's 2 cats, his car, and his condo. It wasn't his parents. It wasn't his trust fund. He had all this money coming in. He didn't care if they turned off the money. He didn't care about anything about except his cats, his car, and his condo. That's it. That's all he cared about. And so we helped him understand that he's going to lose his trust if he doesn't get sober. And then he's going to after he loses his trust, who's going to pay the mortgage on the condo? You ain't got the money anymore, so your family's going to sell the condo because they're not paying the mortgage and they're not going to get bad credit. They're going to return the car back to the leasing company because they're not making the payments anymore. And your cats, you're going to end up in the homeless shelter, and your cats are going to end up in the animal shelter, and we're going to go down there and we're going to ask them how long animals stay alive. And that part of Florida, it was 7 days. That's the motivator for that person. Cutting off the funds. He didn't care. I'll figure out a way to pay. In his mind, the alcoholic's like, I'll figure it out. I don't need them. I don't need my parents. It's better if I don't have them in my life. You got to dig and figure out what is the motivator. What makes them tick?
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
What's your typical fee for an intervention?
Interventions right now could range from some of my colleagues could do them as low as $500. I've seen people do them. That's what I started out with. Our company, we do them from $2,700 to $12,500. So they get quite costly. Our company, we just started doing them for $2,700, which is kind of low. The main intervention usually costs $7,500. And then I just did one in London and I got $15,500, but it just depends on who's doing it, what's their experience, what's their education in it. It's just like anything else. You get a heart surgeon that goes in. Are you going to get an intern that's going to do the surgery, or are you going to get somebody that's been doing it for years? Anybody? One more?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, if you guys want to come back next week, I'll be here.
Good one. Thank you again. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's great.